Hi, this is Kevin from Passion for the Word. Today's video is one that we kind of talked about a little bit when we did the one on prophecy. Been working on putting this together for a little bit. There's actually going to be 3 videos. My wife is working on trying to figure out how to put a link in the video, but there's 3 videos we have that all kind of tie to this. The first one is the purpose of prophecy, that really as it relates to Psalm 22. The other one is some thoughts on crucifixion and sin. I think that'd be a one to possibly watch with this one, and can't remember the other one, but I'll let you know before the video is done if it comes to me. We're going to do a little study on the crucifixion itself. I think sometimes we fail to realize just how terrible sin is, just how expensive it is to pay for. I think we do this because we live in a world surrounded by sin. We live in a sinful world. This was not part of God's original plan. The world that God originally made for man was perfect. I mean, the climate was perfect. They didn't need clothes. Food was just an arm's reach away. There was no death. There was no suffering. Sin changed all that. Romans 5:12 says, "Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned." Sin is the sole reason Jesus went to the cross. He went there willingly to pay for our sins so that we could spend eternity with Him in heaven. This shouldn't be news to any of you. At least I hope not. But have you ever really looked at what it cost Him? And I'm not talking the spiritual pain. I mean, there's a whole other subject, the separation from God, taking on our sin. I'm talking just the physical pain that Jesus went through to be on that cross. It was tremendous. For He hath made, in 2 Corinthians 5:21, it says, "For He hath made Him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteous of God in Him." That's a good time for a cough. You can edit that all out easily, right? Since we're right on a screen. If I time my coughs to get a more full understanding of the physical pain and misery Jesus went through, we have to start at the beginning of the ordeal. Jesus had a full day before Judas' betrayal, and then a sleepless night. In Matthew 26 and in Mark chapter 14, we have the account where Jesus goes to pray and asks a few of His disciples to sit while He goes to pray. And when He comes back, He scolds them for falling asleep. He does this twice. So on top of everything else we're going to cover, the physical pain and all that, we can add sleep deprivation. The disciples couldn't stay up that long. Granted, sleep deprivation is a small thing, but you know, all these things add up as a cumulative effect. Now, while praying, it says in Luke 22:44, "And being in an agony, He prayed more earnestly, and His sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling to the ground." This is a rare but known condition called hematohydrosis. Hemato meaning blood, and hydrosis meaning water. Hematohydrosis is where blood vessels that feed the sweat glands rupture and cause those glands to actually leak blood. Extreme fear and intense mental contemplation are the 2 main non-disease causes. Now, I don't believe Jesus feared the cross. I think He may have feared separation from the Father as He became sin for us. This condition, hematohydrosis, causes dehydration in a person. So now, before Jesus is even confronted, and before the first beating, the first hit, Jesus is sleep deprived and dehydrated. Shortly after this, we have the actual betrayal, and then Jesus ends up before the Sanhedrin. In the first of the several illegally held trials, and we'll cover that, how each one of these trials was actually illegal, both in the Jewish custom and in the Roman custom. But that's for another video. "And some began to spit on Him," this is a Sanhedrin, "spit on Him, and to cover His face, and to buffet Him, and to say unto Him, Prophesy. And the servants did strike him with the palms of their hands. They covered his face. He was blindfolded. Now, it's one thing to be hit. Imagine that they were probably holding him and, punching him. Here it says they were slapping him. It's one thing to be beaten that way. But can you imagine doing it blindfolded? I mean, when you know the hit's coming, you can kind of prepare for it. You can move into it. Jesus didn't know when the next punch was coming or where it was coming from. As many as were astonished at thee, his visage was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. This is saying he was beaten so badly that his visage, his appearance, was so disfigured, more than any man. Even his body was disfigured by this from the beating. Isaiah 50:6 adds to it, I gave my back to the smiters, and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. I hid not my face from shame and spitting. They even ripped the very beard off of his face. That's the degree of and this is just the first beating. They blindfolded him, they beat him so bad that he was no longer recognizable as a man. They ripped the beard off of his face. The other video is Jesus' appearance after the crucifixion. I told you I'd come up with it before the end of the video. The Jews had lost the legal right to execute a man about 25 years earlier. So they took Jesus to the Romans, Pilate specifically, to have him executed using Roman law. Pilate, of course, didn't want to do this, but the Sanhedrin insisted. The Sanhedrin, rather than having Jesus released, he told Pilate to release Barabbas. Then he released Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Now that just seems like a small thing, but the scourging was not a small thing at all. The Jews had a law that they could not whip a condemned man more than 39 times. It's 40 minus 1 is what it was, and it was supposed to be merciful. The Romans didn't have any such law. The whip they used would have usually about 9 thongs on it, usually 18 to 24 inches long, and they would have either pieces of bone, glass, or metal embedded in them. And they would whip the condemned man. And I want to these pictures here I got off the internet. I believe that the Journal of American Medical Association had done a study in 1989 on the crucifixion, and I believe these diagrams are from them. I'm grateful for whoever did these. They're very detailed, even though they are gruesome. It would strip the flesh off. It would start out by ripping the skin off, and then after that, it would actually rip chunks of muscle out. And you could see the pattern from the. I don't know if you can see it here in the picture with the angle that the Roman would be swinging it. They tended to rip the flesh off that direction. And this is why it says in Isaiah 53:5, but he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. That is referring to the stripes laid out by the scourging. This caused massive blood loss. In Matthew 27:29 it says, and when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand, and they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. I find the crown of thorns rather interesting because thorns are actually part of the curse because of sin in the Garden of Eden. Before sin, from my reading of the Bible, I don't believe thorns were there. So I don't think the Romans had any idea they were doing this, but a crown of thorns, kind of a crown of sin. Matthew 27:30, and they spit upon him and took the reed, the staff they'd given. It was probably a flexible, made out of like woven plants or something, but a flexible rod, something you could kind of bend like that, took the reed and smote him upon the head. So now after all this, they're beating him again. All this before the actual crucifixion. So at this point, before the crucifixion is even started, we have sleep deprivation, we have dehydration, we already have severe blood loss, we have a blindfolded severe beating, we have a flesh-ripping scourging, leaving stripes of flesh on his backside, another beating, having the beard ripped off his face at some point, a crown of thorns, and another beating. Now, crucifixion was quite possibly the most intensely cruel death man has ever devised. The Persians, it's actually where our word excruciating comes from. The CRU is the same root word as in crucifixion. The Persians originally came up with it around 400 BC, but the Romans are the ones that really, they adopted it in 100 BC, and they're the ones that really perfected it. Now, the cross has two main parts. You've got the patibulum, which is the piece that goes this way, and then the stipes, which goes this way. There is the saddle, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, that some had at this point as a step. Not all of them did that. The patibulum, of course, they all varied in weight, but they're estimated to weigh between 75 and 125 pounds. Now, after the beating he had, he's got this thing strapped to him, and he's got to carry it to the point of the crucifixion. The site of the crucifixion at Golgotha was roughly 650 yards. Now think about that. After the beating this man's just taken, a beating that a lot of people didn't even live through, he had to carry a weight of between 75 and 125 pounds, longer than the length of 6 football fields. It's no wonder he needed some help. The upright piece of wood, okay, it's called the stipes. We'll do on the title list. I'm not going to really cover this. This is the one that Pilate made that had the 3 things about Jesus being the King of the Jews. We're going to do another video on that because there's some really interesting things going on here, and I don't want to distract from this one. But Jesus was tied to this, and then later on he would have been nailed to it. Now the nails were 5 to 9 inches long. Now they were not actually driven into the hand as a lot of people believe and are portrayed. And actually, I think the Bible says it. The first thing to remember is we count this as the hand. But as I understand it, at that time, they counted the wrist as part of the hand. It's been, with studies done on cadavers, they found if they put the nail in the palm of the hand, it wouldn't hold. It would actually pull through, and eventually the body would have fallen down. They didn't want that. They drove the nail. We know this from archaeological discovery of bodies we've dug up that were crucified and where the damage was done. They drove it through the wrist here, in an area between the radius and the ulna and the carpal bones. If you've ever talked to anybody that's got carpal tunnel, or if you have it, the pain caused by carpal tunnel syndrome is just that nerve, the very same nerve that we're going to be talking about. It's just that nerve being pinched. If you've ever hit your funny bone, that fire of pain that shoots through your body, that's just from that nerve, which is a different nerve, but just getting bumped. The nail, with where they would do it, would actually go right through the middle of that nerve. I can't even imagine the fire of pain that would cause. Probably shot clear up into the neck. This also, by nailing at that point, it produced no broken bones, which is an important prophetic thing. The next thing that they did is they took the feet and they placed one foot on top of the other, and then the nail was driven through the metatarsal bones. There again, wouldn't break any bones. Now think about how sensitive your feet are. If you've ever bruised your foot, just imagine a nail going through both feet together. We're talking some incredible pain. The next thing they would do, they would bend the legs at a 45-degree angle. Now this is a position that's nearly impossible to hold. I tried this. Just try standing with your legs bent like that. And within seconds, you're going to feel some fire in your thighs. I stopped it in a minute and a half. If you're a Sunday school teacher and you got some teenage kids, have a challenge. See who can stand like this the longest. I think it might be some good lessons there, just to see just this least little, of all the things he's going through, this is probably the least of them. And just to think how bad that is by itself. Now, when the legs, and you'll see, if you actually try this, you'll see that your leg muscles cannot hold this position long at all, as far as holding the weight up. So the next thing that happens with all the weight on the arms at the angle that it ends up dislocating the shoulders. Shortly after that, it dislocates the elbows, then the wrists. When all that happens, the arm of the victim is within minutes 6 to 9 inches longer than it had been originally. Now the pulling on those muscles against the body, it ends up pulling on the muscles that we use to breathe, and it makes it nearly impossible to breathe while in that position. They could inhale, but it's not possible to exhale like that. In order to exhale, the victim has to push up with his feet. Now that's driving all the pressure against that nail now. So you've got the choice of, the weight hanging from here and the incredible pain, or pushing up with your feet to take the weight off of there so you can exhale properly just to breathe. Now while this is all going on, let's not forget the scourging. The up and down movement, I guarantee they didn't use a polished piece of wood for the stipes. They would use the nastiest rough cut piece of lumber. So the scourged back, every single breath he has to move up and down on this piece of wood. Death by crucifixion is really a very slow form of suffocation. As the victim weakens, they take smaller and smaller breaths. The blood oxygen level plummets. This is called hypoxemia. The CO2 levels in the body, and CO2 in the body is a poison, it starts to rise, and that's called hypercarbia or hypercapnia. I've seen both of them. I think, from my understanding, both terms are synonymous. So if you see one or the other, it's the same thing. Now this causes the heart to beat faster because the heart's trying to correct this oxygen carbon dioxide imbalance. Problem is there's no oxygen to correct the problem. Now as the heart beats faster and faster, this actually creates a demand for more oxygen, causing this vicious cycle. The lungs end up collapsing, which causes the heart to beat even faster still. This causes a buildup in fluid around the lungs, up to 1 gallon of fluid per side. This fluid comes straight out of the bloodstream, effectively adding to the problem of dehydration and the difficulty in breathing. This causes another increase in the heart rate, as many as 220 beats per minute. My sister-in-law had this happen to her, and she said she could feel the heartbeat throughout her body. So now we have a heart running at maximum speed. It was known for hearts to literally explode under these conditions. The heart's trying to find O2 and other nutrients that simply aren't available. The heart just can't keep doing this, so it begins to fail. And it also develops a fluid around the pericardial sac, which makes the heart's beating even more difficult. And you can see in this diagram, the heart is very enlarged compared to the other body parts. King David lived around 1,000 years before Jesus, and he prophesied all this in Psalm 22. And I am poured out like water. The water getting around the lungs and the heart. This is when they shoved the spear in. This is the water that flowed out. And all my bones are out of joint. Shoulder, elbow, the wrist. My heart is like wax. It's from the overuse, the overstimulation, the trying to keep up, trying to fix this imbalance. It is melted in the midst of my bowels. It's disintegrating inside him. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. The legs, standing in that position, trying to pull himself up for every breath. And my tongue cleaveth to my jaws, the severe dehydration. And thou hast brought me into the dust of death. He is right there on the very edge. For dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. Remember, this is 600 years before this method of death was even invented. And I may tell all my bones. The pain of this, I'm sure he could feel every bone in his body at that point. They look and stare upon me. When someone says you can't prove the Bible, you need look no farther than Psalm 22. We know from archaeology roughly when Psalm 22 was written. And even though it be 600 years before crucifixion was even invented, it is accurately described here. Collapsing lungs, failing heart, blood loss, dehydration, lowering blood O2 level, and an increasing amount of CO2 level, that's what brings death. In the case of Jesus, this took 6 hours. The Romans would sometimes have an act of mercy, and they'd put a little stool there for the man to rest his butt on. This made this act of mercy caused this to last up to 9 days. That's not my definition of mercy. The really amazing thing about all this is that at any moment, Jesus could have said a word and 1,000 angels would have been right there. He was the very creator hanging on a cross of wood for my sins and for yours. It wasn't the nails that held him there. It was his love for every one of us. It was his desire that all of us would choose to accept the price that he paid so that we could go to heaven and spend eternity with him. This is how much our sins cost him. Thank you and God bless.